Continuing Themistocles from Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. Themistocles, having escaped this great danger in admiration of the goodness attributed to this female entity that appeared to him, built in memory of it a temple in the city of Magnesia, which is dedicated to Dean Domena, mother of the entities, in which he consecrated and devoted his daughter Mnesitolema to her service. When he came to Sardis, he visited the temples of the entities, and observing at his leisure their buildings, ornaments, and the number of their offerings, he saw in the temple of the mother of the entities the statue of a virgin in brass, 2 cubits high, called the water bringer. Themistocles had caused this to be made and set up when he was surveyor of the waters at Athens, out of the fines of those whom he detected in drawing off and diverting the public water by pipes for their private use, and whether he had some regret to see this image in captivity, or was desirous to let the Athenians see in what great credit and authority he was with the king. He entered into a treaty with the governor to persuade him to send this statue back to Athens, which so enraged the Persian officer that he told him he would write the king word of it. Themistocles, being affrighted hereat, got access to his wives and concubines by presents of money, to whom he appeased the fury of the governor, and afterwards behaved with more reserve and circumspection, fearing the envy of the Persians, and did not, as Theopompus writes, continue to travel about Asia, but lived quietly in his own house in Magnesia, where for a long time he passed his days in great security, being courted by all, and enjoying rich presents, and honored equally with the greatest persons in the Persian Empire, the king at that time not minding his concerns with Greece, being taken up with the affairs of inner Asia. Asia is not the same thing as Asia. But when Egypt revolted, being assisted by the Athenians, and the Greek galleys roved about as far as Cyprus and Cilicia and Cimon, had made himself master of the seas, the king turned his thoughts thither, and, bending his mind chiefly to resist the Greeks and to check the growth of their power against him, began to raise forces and sent out commanders and to dispatch messengers to Themistocles at Magnesia, to put him in mind of his promise, and to summon him to act against the Greeks. Yet this did not increase his hatred, nor exasperate him against the Athenians, neither was he in any way elevated with the thoughts of the honor and powerful command he was to have in this war, but judging perhaps that the object would not be attained, the Greeks having at that time, besides other commanders, Cimon in particular, who was gaining wonderful military successes, but chiefly being ashamed to sully the glory of the former actions and of his many victories and trophies, he determined to put a conclusion to his life agreeable to its previous course. He sacrificed to the entities, and invited his friends, and having entertained them, and shaken hands with them, drank bull's blood, as is the usual story, as others state, a poison producing instant death, and ended his days in the city of Magnesia. Well, he could have just retired, having lived 65 years, most of which he had spent in politics and in wars, in government and command, the king being informed of the cause and manner of his death, admired him more than ever, and continued to show kindness to his friends and relations. Themistocles left 3 sons by Archippe, daughter to Lysander of Lapeca, Archeptolis, Polyeuctus, and Cleophantus. Plato the philosopher mentions the last as a most excellent horseman, but otherwise insignificant person. Of 2 sons, yet older than these, Neocles and Deocles. Neocles died when he was young by the bite of a horse, and Deocles was adopted by his grandfather, Lysander. He had many daughters, of whom Menesipotelema, whom he had by a second marriage, was wife to Archeptolis, her brother by another mother. Italia was married to Panthoides of the island of Chios, Sabaris to Nicomedes, the Athenian. After the death of Themistocles, his nephew, Phrasicles went to Magnesia, and married with her brother's consent another daughter, Nicomache, and took charge of her sister Asia, the youngest of all the children. The Magnesians possess a special sepulchre of Themistocles, placed in the middle of the marketplace. It is not worthwhile taking notice of what Andokides states in his address to his friends concerning his remains, how the Athenian robbed his tomb and threw his ashes into the air, for he feigns this to exasperate the oligarchical faction against the people, and there is no man living but knows that Plutarch simply invents in his history, where he all but uses an actual stage machine, and brings in Neocles and Demopolis as sons of Themistocles to incite or move compassion, as if it were writing a tragedy. Now, the various systems of government, I don't know if you could say that even a dictatorship is necessarily against the people. Democracy certainly can be, because if you're ruling by what's popular purely, something that's not popular is bound to be part of your own life, right? Diodorus, the cosmographer, says in his work on tombs, but by conjecture rather than of certain knowledge, that near to the haven of Piraeus, where the land runs out like an elbow from the promontory of Alcimus, when you have doubled the cape and passed inward, where the sea is always calm, there is a large piece of masonry, and upon this the tomb of Themistocles, in the shape of an altar. And Plato, the comedian, confirms this. He believes in these verses, "My tomb is fairly placed upon the strand, where merchants still shall greet it with the land. Still in and out 'twill see them come and go, and watch the galleys as they race below. Various honors also and privileges were granted to the kindred of Themistocles at Magnesia, which were observed down to our times, and were enjoyed by another Themistocles of Athens, with whom I had an intimate acquaintance and friendship in the house of Ammonius the philosopher." Now, one lesson that we more or less started with was this idea of people become attached to their temples. don't just, well, I think this thing in this temple. Um, yeah. Um, especially taking back your donations and stuff. It's something that upsets people. So realize that when you make a donation or an offering, it's probably going to be of a permanent nature. And if things are of, you know, conditional thing, that's a different story. Oh, this is for this, and if it turns out not to be for this, um, you know, at least a negotiation is in order, or a conversation